Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here, day 4. Great to see you're still hanging in there. My name is Marta Whitaker, and I'm responsible for the AWS Marketplace business in EMEA. I have been with AWS for 6 years. This is reInvent number 7. I started about the time we launched the AWS Marketplace, and at that time we were building out the catalog. And 3 years later, I relocated to Europe. I live in Luxembourg, and am driving the business there, building out the team. So today we're going to talk about how to safeguard your code in deploying in a DevSecOps environment. And what I'm going to do specifically is give you a brief introduction on what AWS Marketplace is. So before we get started, I'd be curious to know how many of you have bought something or have some kind of experience with AWS Marketplace? Okay, a few of you. I will make a brief introduction, but I want you to know it's not going to be a deep dive into Marketplace. There are other sessions that we've done this week where you can watch recordings of that. It's not going to be a deep dive in DevOps or security. That'd be really hard to do in the time that we have now. Again, you know, there are other sessions on that and focus on AWS services in this space and in other sessions that have been done. Okay, so what is AWS Marketplace? It is a curated digital catalog, software catalog. And it, much like, if you've experienced Amazon.com, it's much like that buying experience in that it helps you buy, helps you find and deploy software in a very quick, easy, fast deployment manner. So in 2012, when we launched the Marketplace, we launched it with a pay-as-you-go model. Now, back in 2012, that was pretty revolutionary that you could actually buy software per hour. But at that time, we had many customers who were buying AWS services per hour and expected the same thing from software. The Marketplace allows a customer to, when they purchase services, to combine on the bill those AWS software purchases with the AWS software purchases with the AWS services. And another important thing to note about what we do is we continuously scan the catalog. So we are going to be alerted, identify if there's a vulnerability to make sure that the catalog stays very safe and secure. Now, what do we mean by customizing the provision? So, as I talked about, you can find software very easily across a breadth of categories like security, networking, DevOps. But where you get to do things maybe a little differently than you would in a traditional software purchases is you have a selection of different pricing options. So I talked about being able to purchase it per hour, but you can also, we also have the option to use free trial. So quickly after we launched, we realized that one of the top use cases for the AWS Marketplace was to be able to kick the tires on the software. So allowing free trial enabled that. We also later on continued to innovate and launched annual and multi-year pricing. And what we launched last year, which has really gotten a lot of momentum, is seller private offers. So you can imagine that if you're using the software in a dev test environment and you're using it for testing, purchasing it for a short period of time might work out pretty well. But if you want to deploy it into production, then you get into maybe the more traditional pricing modes, and so being able then to allow the customer to negotiate as they would traditionally the pricing and T's and C's with that ISV, but deploying it through the Marketplace became very attractive for our customer base. And so we've seen a big uptake on that functionality. We've also continued to innovate in different deployment options. So started out with Amazon Machine Image, AMI, quickly followed on with software as a service, which you can imagine with its popularity. We support CloudFormation templates. And at this conference, we announced the Marketplace for containers. So now you can deploy to ECS or EKS, Kubernetes. So in 2012, we were pretty excited to be at reInvent, number one, and have a software catalog of probably over 100 different listings. So now let's fast forward where we've got over 4,200 product listings in the marketplace. And that's supplied by over 1,300 ISVs. And on the customer side, we have now 200,000 active customers. So those are our customers who have purchased in the last month and are buying in Marketplace. Now, also I want to mention, in terms of growth, the velocity. And so to go back to 2015, that was the first time we shared this stat, we had 87 million hours of EC2 deployed. EC2 is how we're tracking consumption. Contrast that with today, you can see we're at 650 million hours of EC2 deployed monthly. So it's probably not hard, especially being this week here in Las Vegas at reInvent, to believe that the public cloud trend is just going to keep accelerating. So what they're saying is, a little over 3 years, that 94% of all workloads will be in a cloud data center. Now, what they're also saying is that 73% of those workloads will be in the public cloud. And it's not hard to imagine that you're going to have the majority of those workloads running SaaS. Now, with this kind of transformation happening, you can also see that it's a good time for customers, companies to reevaluate what their software portfolio looks like. And so what we've encountered over the last couple of years in having lots and lots of conversations with customers is this model has emerged, which we call the 550-500. And that is where the top part of this pyramid, or the bottom part, however you want to look at it, the number 5 is where you've got the 5 big players, and that's Microsoft and IBM and SAP, and companies dealing with those software vendors they put a lot of resources toward, managing those relationships, and that's probably not going to change in the foreseeable future. Those guys, probably represent over 50% of IT spend. But it's this next segment, the 50, which really it's a sweet spot for AWS Marketplace, and it really represents an opportunity to think about how you procure and provision software from this set of software vendors. At the bottom, you see the 500, and that's the long tail of your software portfolio. And yes, we in the marketplace do have a lot of startups and cloud-native software vendors, but it's really the middle, the 50, that present an opportunity to do something, to procure a bit differently with. Now, these 50 ISVs, they basically represent or come out of these 8 categories right here. And I think you probably recognize many of them on the screen right now. And we work closely with these ISVs. Many of these ISVs have achieved the AWS competency level within APN. They have worked with us, many of our technical team, to optimize their software to run in AWS. And we will continue to expand, enhance our catalog across these categories, other categories, and we will also add new categories. So this week we had another announcement where we announced a new category for machine learning. So today you can look at the machine learning category, over 200 listings of algorithms, models, which can be deployed directly to SageMaker. So in summary, why AWS and why AWS for DevSecOps? Well, since the beginning, since 2012, developers have been one of the key buyers of our marketplace. And as I said, they do it because they can get it quickly, they can deploy it quickly, like many times with one click, and it's also consolidated on their bill. So what we want to do today is we want to talk about how, as I said, we would focus on a real-life use case. So what we want to do now is switch over to Matt. You've got to work on your name. Githari. It's just Matt. He's going to take you through why AWS Marketplace for security and look at the real-life use case with General Dynamics IT. And I hand it over to you, Matt.
Great. Thanks, Marta. Welcome. Thanks for attending our session today. I know it's been a long week. You've probably been to a lot of breakouts. We're going to try to make this interesting and keep you awake here. So first of all, let me just ask the audience really quickly, who's aware of the shared responsibility model? You guys know what that is? Yeah, that's what I figured. So the entire reason that I'm here and that we work with companies like General Dynamics IT is to make sure that we have sufficient offerings from a security and DevOps point of view so that you, the customer, can take care of your responsibilities when it comes to securing your application delivery pipelines, right? That's my corner of the world. We're going to highlight Chef today as one of our key third-party offerings that helps with continuous compliance, automated remediation, and so on and so forth. And you'll get a good idea of how there are a number of tools, including Chef, that can help you with your responsibility in this model. So my job here today is not to go into a really super deep dive on DevSecOps. What I really want to do is I'm going to talk in sort of a reference architecture type of way about how we think about DevSecOps, some of the problems from a very abstract level, and then really this is just to provide context for our guests here from General Dynamics. So before we talk about DevSecOps, it's probably helpful to just talk about DevOps, right? You can't have DevSecOps without DevOps. So I'm just quickly going to kind of go through this. Waterfall methodology for producing code, for getting code deployed into production environments. It's a lengthy process. You're taking lots and lots of code. You're working on lots and lots of features over a very, very long time, and this can mean years in some instances. It can be, I think General Dynamics is going to talk about their sort of process and how long it took in terms of being longer than a year. But generally speaking, what happens here is you're doing lots and lots of work. There's not a lot of automation there. At the end, you're doing some testing. If something's wrong, you got to send it back. And it's really not an ideal way to deploy your software, right? Then you have the agile folks that came in and said, look, there's a better way to do this. We can take smaller feature sets, code to that, put some automated testing in here, and then get it over to production a little bit faster, right? Problem with that is that the operations folks weren't always necessarily ready to take that code and put it into production and actually make it work. So the underlying infrastructure wasn't prepped for it. So that's where DevOps then comes in, and you use the same sort of agile methodologies, but you add the ops folks in here where they're treating their infrastructure as code, right? And Chef and tools like Puppet have the ability to define your infrastructure as code. You treat your infrastructure code just as you would your application code. You run it through the same tests along with your application code. And then at the end of the day or at the end of the process, and these are very, very small intervals now that we're talking about, you can deploy your application code on your infrastructure code in a very cohesive way. And there are no surprises at the end. So you can do very, very fast deployments very, very frequently. So the kind of the equation for DevOps, if you will, it's automation times your development and infrastructure code, right? You want to automate as much of that process as you can in these really quick iterative processes, and that gives you DevOps. So automation, we're gonna be talking a lot about automation today. And we're gonna talk a lot about cloud automation. Automation is, it's a big deal, it's a big thing. Allowing people to do things that have higher order value, right? Rather than manual tasks. That's a key piece of what you do in DevOps. It's a key piece of, as you'll see, what we're doing in DevSecOps. And ideally, if the more you can get automated, right, as you go up the stack, as you go into your containerized environments, as you go across these things, there is this theoretical goal out there where you could have 100% automation. I'm going to actually take you through why that's not realistic. It's something, again, theoretically we talk about that, but there are some manual processes that have to be put in place. Again, we'll get into that a little bit. So automation, I tried to pick an example of a really cool automation, right? And so there's a story that just came out that I read about a month ago about bots that were disguised as developers, basically, right? And what these bots did was they went into an application and they automatically discovered vulnerabilities. But they not only automatically discovered the vulnerabilities, because that's pretty easy to do, get a bunch of scanners that can do that, but they then developed patches for those vulnerabilities and then submitted them back to the developer. Now, the developer thought that this was a live person that was doing this, but it was actually a bot. And I think 5 of these remediations were actually accepted. So that's kind of where we're going with things like automation and remediation. We'll talk about automated remediation a lot more with the GDIT guys and when they're talking about Chef. So again, looking at DevOps, what you need to understand from a basic point of view is you have speed, you have the need to deliver code faster and faster. That's kind of on the y-axis here. You have an operations side or an infrastructure side that needs stability, right? And so you can be very, very fast and not stable, and that's kind of looking at it from a vertical point of view here. And then you can be stable and not very fast, right? You don't want to have those two things be mutually exclusive. What you want to do with your DevOps practice is actually cover more of this space where you're getting the speed and the stability that you need. Likewise with security and compliance. When you want to layer security and compliance onto this model, the first thing you need to realize is that security and compliance are not the same thing, right? They're very tightly associated, but they're not the same thing. And I do a whole talk on security versus compliance that we're not going to get into today. But suffice it to say, you can be secure and not compliant. You can be compliant but not necessarily secure. And what you want to do is you really want to maximize the values of both of those things just in the same way that you're doing with speed and stability. So what happens when you do that? You'll see a trend here, I think. What you do is you get DevSecOps, right? You have speed and stability on one hand that is not inhibited by security and compliance on the other side, right? So you're not being told by your security teams or your compliance teams, this is no good. This has too many vulnerabilities. You got to go fix this stuff. You got to patch this stuff before we can get it into production. While the developers are saying, yeah, but we needed these features yesterday to be delivered, right? So I had to get this picture, and my daughter drew this, and this is kind of the lion, unicorn, Pegasus, possibly. So solving for the problem, again, what you want to do in DevSecOps is you want to take that DevOps pipeline that provides your speed and stability, and you want to layer in security and compliance throughout every stage of your DevOps process. And then this is more of kind of the Gartner Magic Quadrant view of the world, right? So you want to be up in the upper right-hand corner here where you can quickly iterate your software. And again, security is not an inhibitor. Security is actually enhanced, it's embedded, it's part of the process. It's an automated part of the process. What we'll see, again, when we talk with the GDIT guys is that, again, having 100% automation or having everything fully automated is not something that necessarily can be done, and sometimes you don't want to do that. And that's what I just said, right? We're automation enthusiasts, but there is the real world. I'm going to take you through a whiteboard exercise via PowerPoint, which is going to be really exciting here. So let's imagine that I'm drawing this, okay? So you have delivery frequency on the x-axis here, right? So that is your DevOps team, that's your development team wanting to get faster and faster features out and published into production environments. You got the security team on the y-axis here, right? You got some theoretical times here that you can deliver code, right? And deliver it hopefully securely and compliantly. And then you have sort of this line that's, hey, here's optimal security. Here's where we would love to be, all else being equal, right? So here's case studies. So recall the waterfall methodology that I talked about, right? Where you have a lot of code being worked on and kind of compounded over very, very long periods of time. Not a lot of automation. So you aren't able to test frequently within that development process what's happening from a security perspective, right? So are there flaws in here that can turn into vulnerabilities, for instance? Are there things that I need to patch from an open source perspective that I need to catch very, very early on? You're not doing any of that stuff. And what happens is at T6 or T7 or so, you're doing some sort of manual security check, and the security guys are coming to you and saying, look, you got 3 choices here, right? We know this thing needed to be delivered at T6, but you can go with our option A, which is fix a few of these things, right, and deliver it within a couple of time periods, right? So 1 or 2 weeks later, right? But yes, so you're gonna have a little bit speedier delivery there, but you're gonna sacrifice your security. Then option B is, well, fix a little bit more of those bugs, but it's gonna take a longer time to do that. So you get a little bit more security, but less speed there, right? And then option C here is fix a lot of it, or as much as you can, and then you're really sacrificing your time to market in this case, right? This other line that I drew, this is more of the Netflix or the born in the cloud model, as I would call it. So these are companies that are really super quickly iterating software. They're using a lot of automated testing, they're using a lot of automated security processes in it, and they're deploying, hourly, every other hour, 2-3 times a day. And those are, again, the Amazon.coms of the world and, the Lyfts of the world and so on and so forth, right? So they are automation enthusiasts. And then you have what I think is more closely related to the real world, right? So you have a bunch of automated processes, and you automate what you can or what you should, given your corporate policies, given the regulatory compliance, status that you're in, and so on and so forth. And then you're kind of going with some manual processes where you have to, right? And then GDIT is going to talk a little bit more about that. So when we talk about DevSecOps, there are basically 2 ways of looking at this, right? There's security of the CI/CD pipeline itself, right? So those are going to be your normal things like identity access management, making sure that the right people have the right access to the right things at the right time, right? You're going to be talking about things like a WAF to make sure that you're able to do proper web application firewall stuff. And then you're going to have a bunch of other things, logging, monitoring. You're going to have ITSM involved in that. You're going to have communication platforms like Slack for chat ops, right? So there's an entire world of products that sort of insulate, if you will, the CI/CD pipeline. What we're going to be more focused on today is actually the security that's embedded in the code itself, right? So we want to think about compliance. First of all, we want to think about security from a CI/CD point of view. We have different stages of the CI/CD process. I'm not going to do a super deep dive into this because this is a 60-minute presentation in and of itself. But this is just to give you some idea of some of the security things, some of the security tools that are tied to different parts of the CI/CD DevOps process, right? So you have things like static analysis that happens early on in the pre-commit phase. You get into software composition analysis to look for open source flaws in the commit phase. You have more dynamic analysis that goes on. You have your unit testing of your infrastructure code, pen tests, and so on and so forth. And then when you get ready to deploy and you're thinking about your production environment, the safety and security of your production environment, you get into runtime application self-protection. You get into things like configuration management and so on and so forth. So underlying all of this really is continuous compliance, right? So recall, security is not the same as compliance. You also need to make sure that everything you're doing throughout this process is connected to your compliance standards as well. So here are some of the offerings in the marketplace that we have that fall under this sort of embedded security, if you will, inside of your code, right? So we have continuous compliance offerings. We have static analysis offerings. We're working with a lot of the dynamic analysis players today. The open source scanners like Black Duck, container vulnerability has become a big part of what we do now, working with companies like Tenable and Twistlock. And then the runtime application self-protection, as I mentioned, getting a nice core set of partners in that space. So to kind of sum all of this up, with DevSecOps, it's not just delivering at speed and delivering into stable environments. It's really helping the developers to treat their application code and their infrastructure code, looking at security flaws as really functional defects, right? And the same thing goes for infrastructure, right? I want to kind of make sure I keep banging the drum on this. Your infrastructure can be treated as code, and it can be treated the same way as your application code, right? So you can do similar types of testing, not exactly the same, but you can do security checks on your infrastructure code as it's going through that CI/CD pipeline. So at the end of the day, you want your developers to be able to push application code and accelerate that into production through CI/CD. Ops teams want to get that infrastructure code ready and prepared to receive that application code. And then the third big piece of this is really having security compliance being part of this and orchestrated really well with application code in your infrastructure code. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our friends from General Dynamics IT, and they're going to take you through a very specific use case.
Appreciate that, Matt. I'm Brad. This is Zach. We're from GDIT. And kind of our scope there, we're senior cloud engineers. We have over 200 AWS accounts, which run thousands of nodes in our environment. And talking about our journey, kind of what got us started, I'll give you a little story. Our process is really centered around security. And what we did was we were taking SMTP, a mail relay, moving it from a Windows box over to a Linux box. With that, we have a very manual check, going through all that. It took 13 months to get into what we call ATO, which is kind of like time to production. Through that process, we also realized that there wasn't really any visibility post that. We do have, continuous monitoring, stuff like that, but really what's going on in the environment, on the nodes, and the scalability, 13 months to ATO. I know other individuals in our environment go anywhere from 6 months to 18 months, which really, it doesn't help our developers, it doesn't help our operations team. So being able to have that scalability and visibility is key for us.
So one of the big things being an intelligence division of General Dynamics, what we provide and why we need to fix it is we need to be able to provide applications to the warfighter, to either our customers on the ground or customers globally. And with those applications being delayed, obviously we need to make sure that we increase that time so that we can get those new applications out there to support our cause. But also it enables our security teams to actually increase efficiency within their division, get that compliance and continuous monitoring, and then also move towards actual remediation of things like 0 days. And then truly give our security team positive control, because currently they're in a fight or flight type of mentality, and fix the fires that come up and then move on to the next one.
So knowing what some of our issues are, as well as knowing why we need to fix it, gave us a lot of motivation to develop a solution and really bring, like we were talking about, our ATO process, make it a lot shorter, give us that insight across our entire enterprise, being able to continuously evaluate everything that's going on. So when we have someone who is another engineer or another program who has access to that box, and they decide to change something, being able to see that change and how it impacts our environment, as well as mitigation of 0-day vulnerabilities, which is huge. So some of those components that enabled us to do that was Inspect, Chef Client, Chef Automate, Habitat, and a CI/CD pipeline.
So just to give you a little bit insight onto Inspec and Chef Client, obviously Inspec is just a system service that runs compliancy profiles, and Chef Client is a local system service that allows you to do your configuration management and mitigation of these 0 days. Well, one of the big things for us is in relation to Brad's story, why it took 13 plus months for us to get this accredited was essentially, before we had Inspec, we had to step through each individual process of creating it, testing it, getting it staged, and then we got to security and we said, hey guys, we're ready to get this accredited and move to production. And they said, all right, well, based off these controls and based off everything it's accredited to, we need you to go back and fix these things. Well, then we'd go back through the cycle, fix, remediate, come back. Well, then it would sit on the desk for a while, and then they didn't, they'd come back and say, no, we need more. And then finally we got to production. Well, we brought in Inspec, and now using Inspec, we're able to have that continuous compliance all the way through all the processes. So within your dev, within your QA, and then actually being able to have security see that from the beginning of life to the end of life, so that they actually have insight through the entire process, and we don't have to wait as long. And in regards of the SMTP, we were actually able to use Inspec to get an accreditation of the system within 2 weeks with future iterations of that system. And what that allowed us to do is bringing Inspec in allowed us to bring multiple teams together, not only just us as the infrastructure team, but also be able to bring in our security team and our DevOps team in regards to, all right, well, hey, we built it, security sees us testing it, they see our remediation, our fixes getting implemented, and we're able to actually show that throughout all the stages we're compliant, but also very secure. And it's all the way from, obviously the beginning to the end. So one of the big things with Inspec and, our security team, we were very big data center centric, and we were told, hey, we're going to move to this cloud and we're going to just essentially go in here. Well, one of the things is we needed to be able to show them that this is human readable. So being able to show security that Inspec is very easy to read in the fact of, hey, this control with this title, and we'd be able to give a description based off of, whatever framework, NIST or CIS benchmark, and give it a score saying, hey, this package, libsc Linux, it should be installed. Very simple, straightforward, allowed us to bring them in. But not only does that allow for the infrastructure side, it allows us to also do application level. Us being the infrastructure team, obviously, we want to be the ones doing the infrastructure as code and providing that compliance profiles for that, but we also need our developers developing these applications for the warfighter. So being able to give them insight with these compliance profiles, checking their systems that they're writing in regards to anything from containers to Nginx, packages, Postgres, XML configurations, they're actually able to see through their stage of development that they're being within being secure but also being compliant.
So great. So we can see what's in our environment now, but we realize at that point we've got issues, right? We've got to fix them. We utilize Chef Client on the systems to do that. What that allows you to do is have that continuous integration component, being able to deploy the same code when you're deploying out a system. Let's say it needs to be replaced because of whatever issues. Being able to do that in an automated fashion and being able to have the same consistent configuration across your enterprise, as well as being able to integrate if, let's say, another 0-day comes out tomorrow. Being able to deploy that across your enterprise within minutes is a huge benefit, especially versus doing it manual. So, one of the other components that we were talking about earlier was the Chef Automate. Having that single pane view into our entire enterprise. So we got the configuration management component, we got the Inspec component, but those getting reported, right? How do we integrate security in with that? Chef Automate enables us to do that. So kind of what all you can do with Chef Automate is you can not only view the results of your Chef client configuration when things are changed on nodes, let's say there's an update in code, but you can also see your applications, the Inspec runs, the compliancy that Zach was talking about. So to kind of give you an idea of what is built in with Chef Automate, that continuous compliance, by default, I know they have 125 plus systems out there, but really, it's that real time, being able to check your entire environment, getting reporting to our security guys, and validating what's really going on. So part of that also is evaluating our accounts. When you have 200 plus AWS accounts, it's very difficult to go through it manually. And not all of our accounts are identical. There's use cases for different programs and things that we maintain. So being able to tailor it to that program and really evaluate it gives us that positive control over the environment. It's massive, so being able to see all that. A good example is if, let's say we had a bucket out there, an S3 bucket named My Secret Files, because it's got your AWS keys to your admin user account, and you don't want to give that out to anyone. Well, if you have something like that out there, first, you want to make sure the key's there, so maybe you don't want to lose it. You also want to make sure that it shouldn't be public, and that you do log it, so when it gets accessed, things of that nature. So this is just an example of kind of what that looks like as a policy within InSpec.
So being on the infrastructure team and being a big provider as an ISP to hundreds of other accounts, we don't want to dictate the tool set that they have to use. We know that there's plenty of other tools out there, but internally what we like to do is we use Chef very heavily, and we also provide it as an enterprise tool. Well, Chef Habitat allows us to provide these compliance profiles for us to security, and so initially, before utilizing any of the Chef tool set, we were very standardized in building from the operating system up, adding those libraries, the application libraries, the application. Well, when the intelligence division said, hey, we're going to go to this cloud thing, they were like, we're going to use Amazon. They said, we're just going to lift and shift all of our applications, and we're just going to put them in the cloud, and it's going to work. Well, obviously, we all know that doesn't happen. So what Habitat allowed us to do is essentially create contract layers, right? So instead of building from the OS and up, you build from the application down. So we're able to package our applications and actually, in a way, containerize them to where they are sufficient of themselves. They have all their libraries. They have everything that's needed to run that application, independent of what OS they're on, just as long as they're on the same family of the kernel. So this allowed us to build our pipeline, which Brad will go into, that allowed us to get our insight into our base Amazon image that we create, and also be agnostic to the tool set so that our providers don't have to worry about ingesting just what we provide.
Yeah, so like Zach was saying, CI/CD pipeline is huge, right? Being able to have that consistency, test your code, because you don't want to test a code, put it on a box, go through your ATO process, and realize it may not work, right? But having that pipeline, being able to easily go through it and test out your code as you go is huge. So I'm going to give you an example of kind of one of our pipelines. It's very high level, not a lot of detail, but let's say we have a new security vulnerability. We need to write a configuration component for it. We'll take that, we'll write it, push it to Git. In there, Jenkins will see that, kick off a pipeline to, we utilize Packer to spin up the systems and stuff like that, but it utilizes Chef under the hood to do the configuration management changes and some other components like InSpec. At that point, it creates the AMI, and if that build job goes through, everything's good. So then Jenkins takes that AMI, then kicks it off through the CloudFormation. We install Habitat and Inspect at this point because we want to evaluate all of our systems, all of our applications on that new AMI, make sure it works for our entire enterprise. Those results then get reported into Chef Automate. So now you have not only your testing, but your single pane of glass for your new AMIs. And then it also, Chef Automate notifies us, as well as security, that, hey, there's a new AMI there, it passed, here's your current status of it. If we're okay with that, then we go into GitLab, then we merge to master. And that will then kick off a build job that then creates an AMI that we share across our enterprise.
So the biggest thing, obviously, with the key benefits, not only do we use, as was mentioned, the marketplace AMIs, obviously, right? You know, we go anything from Red Hat, Sun OS to the Windows, and that marketplace provides us the standard base image across all of our environments to make sure so that we don't have to build that OS ourselves. So we highly benefit off the marketplace. But then with utilizing the marketplace and utilizing Chef and the entire suite of their tools, it really did provide us a real-time view of the enterprise when it comes to from beginning of life to end of life. It gives security that positive control that they've been looking for, and ensures that they're not worried about what's actually being spun up in our environment. And then we can obviously, be able to detect any security issues or flaws in the applications before they even reach production. And it provides us that scalability to provide us the ability to move quickly, move fast, and really the biggest goal for us is to be able to reduce that time to production. Because, circling back, we need to be able to provide applications and to the warfighter, to these people on the grounds, because, their job and their mission depends on it. So, but overall, that's, the biggest benefits that we get out of it, and we are continuously growing, continuously moving, so we're going to continue to add more automation, but make sure that we have the steps to have manual verification, because our security team is definitely wants to see what's going on. So, and with that, we have time for Q&A, Matt. And
Yeah. Well,
So if you guys have any questions about what we do, Marketplace, DevOps, DevSecOps, we have time to answer any questions. Yes, sir. So what we're looking at right now is going from that 6 to 18 months down to roughly a week or two, possibly up to a month. But that's really because it enables us on the security side, bringing them along with us throughout the entire process. Any other questions?
Here you go, sir. Trying to convince your security team. How'd you keep your wits about you to convince your security team to adopt such a process?
that's a great question.
That was a big challenge. What it really required was trust, really. Trust that we're taking them in the correct direction, as well as really they were a very data center-centric mindset. And so we had to get them to understand the new toolings within the cloud, like Marketplace and things of that nature, but really trust us, trust the code, trust that the commercial world kind of knows what they're doing. So
another big thing too was, we were very mindset on showing them all the cool stuff with Marketplace and the infrastructure as code and moving fast. But one of the things we had to really kind of lean back and go, well, why are they so hesitant, was realizing that we actually had to come at it from the security side and look at the continuous compliance piece, because we realized that they really had no insight ever. And so giving them the ability to really go, oh, wow, there's a lot of things going on in our environment that we probably didn't realize, gives them that ability to then move forward.
Okay, so the second part of the question I'm going to pose to you is, from that standpoint, right, it's FITARA, subsection D, acquisition, streamlining, modernization, but from that standpoint, how did you go through the acquisition of bringing in Chef in order to bake it into the AMIs and things of that nature? Well, you are baking the
yeah, so
automate.
bringing those into our environment. Is that a good summary of how we go through that? Yeah, so kind of the entire process in of itself. So we have to get things approved because we're not commercial. So doing that, it's been very challenging, but really it came down to what our needs were. What were we needing something, a tool for compliancy? Yes. Were we needing a tool for configuration management? Yeah. So it's really the full scope of everything and specific to our environment. Others may have other things that they bring in that works for them. So.
And the big thing too with that was, Chef was very generous in helping us come to the table and be able to provide a proof of concept. We've been working with them for a few years now, and the biggest thing was as we came to them and said, hey, we need to look at this from a security standpoint because this is how we can sell it to our customer and be able to provide a true tool set for them. So they allowed us to work with them and actually sat next to us and drove this proof of concept. And then they've also were able to see kind of like where we're at within the intelligence division and have been building us these compliance profiles and lockstep so we don't have to do all that manual labor. So that was very beneficial, and it really helped provide, a lot of extra help because, some of our teams are a little bit smaller, so.
Yeah, Chris?
So my question is about Marketplace. And in the description of Marketplace, you mentioned that it's curated. Could you expand on what that means, please?
Yes, so we go through a process with each of the ISVs, each of the products we bring on, and go through this process with each and every ISV to make sure that the product meets certain criteria. We don't test the product for, its functionality, but we do, like I said, we scan for vulnerabilities. So we test to make sure that there's not malware and things like that. We test we confirm that it's, the product is GA'd and ready to be consumed in a production environment.
And that also enables us on our side for having that base to start our entire process as a whole. So.
Because there's that confidence that we've
Right. It's that
gone
trust.
through that process.
Yep.
So using Inspect to do that?
Yes, we're also.
I mean, with the Marketplace?
Oh, with Marketplace?
I'd get shot if I answered that.
Good reply.
Any other questions? Anybody? No? Oh.
Can other agencies use your work, especially in the acquisition, to utilize your process
Yeah.
to quicken the pace of getting to where you're at today?
Yeah, I mean, we put stuff out there for our entire enterprise to see within our environment, kind of more specifically. But we've also, a lot of the stuff that we're using is very public. It's out there on GitHub as well. And so, I mean, yeah, if you need any assistance, just let us know. We can talk afterwards if you would like. Anyone else?
Excellent.
No?
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed
Thank you very
it.
much.
Thank you.